All right. So, welcome everyone to the Gender Equity Community of Practice. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us and each other on our new online space. My name's Amanda Kelly and I'm the CEO of Women's Health Goulburn North East. So before I go any further, I just want to let everybody know that we are actually filming today's session. And to start the meeting, I'd like to acknowledge that we are intersectional in our approach and are proud to stand beside generations of great women whose work has brought us closer to equality for all. I also want to acknowledge the wisdom, living culture and connection of the traditional custodians of the unceded lands on which we work, and acknowledge the profound disruption of colonisation and the stolen generations and on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And finally, I want to state that we believe in shared and just cultural transformation that embraces diversity, and these acknowledgements are part of the ethical principles that guide our work and conduct. Now I'd like to introduce my co-facilitators for this afternoon, Rachel McKay. Rach, do you want to say hi?
Hi everyone.
And Casey McDonald. Casey?
Hello.
So Casey's actually also our moderator for this session, so I'd like to hand over to her to discuss some housekeeping.
Hi everyone, my name's Casey. I'll be moderating today's session. I'll be monitoring the chat, so if anyone needs a hand with any tech issues, I'll try to help you out. Also going to run through a few housekeeping items. So if everyone could just keep themselves on mute, that would be really good, just to manage the background noise. And if you forget, I'll likely just mute you. So if you've got any questions, including any tech questions, just type them into the chat and I'll get back to you. And if we don't get time to get to every question, we will be taking note of them and responding when we send out the recording of today's session and the slide deck next week. So we do know that most of you are already working in this space, but if at any point you need support, we've got some of the contact numbers on the screen here. And so now we'd like to do some introductions. So in the session today, we've got some people who've been working in prevention and gender equity for a long time, others not so long, and others, this may be something entirely new. So some of you may know each other, you may work together, you may recognise each other's faces, but for the benefit of those who may be new to the COP or who may not have met before, if everyone could please introduce themselves in the chat box. So if you could include your name, the organisation that you work for and your role within that organisation, that would be great, and we'll give you a couple of minutes to do this.
Okay, thanks everyone. Oh, this is great. Thanks everyone. And just while you're doing that, I also would like to introduce you to some of the members of our team. Women's Health's been around for more than 20 years, but there are some new faces on the team, so I want to briefly introduce them to you. Some of them are here this afternoon, so I'll get you to unmute and say hi. Margot, are you there, Margot?
I am. Hi, everybody. This is wonderful. Great to see such a turnout.
Thanks, Margot. Rachel, you've already met. Jade is our Regional Gender Equity Coordinator. I think Jade's not able to be here this afternoon. many of you will know Renata, who's on parental leave at the moment, so she's not here this afternoon. Bern, are you around? No.
Yes, I'm here.
Lovely.
Hello, I've just unmuted myself. Hello, I'm Bern Fraser. I work in the sexual and reproductive health area. Great to be here.
Thanks, Bern. So Lauren Salathiel's our communications officer. We have Deb Parkinson, who is our head researcher and works in our gender and disaster pod. And then, as I said, there's Casey. So that's our team. And so with that introduction over, I actually just want to move into, let's get into the community of practice. So the first thing I want to do is talk about what the COP is for and what it isn't for. It is for practitioners working in prevention of violence against women or in the gender equity space. It's for sharing ideas, it's for building knowledge and broadening your practice. It's also for supporting each other in the work, because often this is really hard work and we all need colleagues for support, help, inspiration and recognition, and sometimes just a go you because you're doing a great job. So to start us off, what I would like to do is talk about, so can we go to the next slide please, Casey? So the first thing that I'd like to do is provide a context for the work that we're undertaking. So, excuse me, sorry. Our work's based on the Change the Story framework developed by Our Watch, and it is the national framework for consistent and an integrated approach to preventing violence against women and children in Australia. Oh, yes, thank you, Casey. I just made a mistake. This is what happens when you do this for the first time. Sorry, everyone. I was talking about what the community of practice is and isn't, and I told you what it is, but I didn't tell you what it isn't. So I'm going back to what it isn't. So as I said, it is for people to share ideas, support each other, and building knowledge and broadening your practice. It isn't necessarily for everyone here today. So it's the first session that we're focusing on gender equity as a primary topic rather than prevention of violence as the primary topic. So we've invited a broad range of people across the region, and you might find this isn't what you're looking for. So we're expecting people, some people will hang in there and stay and this is exactly what they need, but others will self-select and decide that this may not be for them. For those of you that decide it isn't quite right for you, but you're looking for some support or have some specific outcomes that you want to achieve, then reach out to us. There may be another way we can provide support or work with you in the work that you're doing. So we'll also be facilitating the COP on a regular basis. So if it's not right for you or your organisation right now, remember we're here and that you can always join at a later date. So why have we broadened it out to include gender equity? As the prevention of violence against women COP worked on the specific issue, it became more and more obvious that as a major driver, gender inequality needs to be addressed. So this coincided with Women's Health taking a look at how we approach gender inequality in a more integrated way. So maybe you can move on to the next one now, Casey. Thank you. So as I said, I want to provide a context. So we work within the Change the Story framework developed by Our Watch, and it is our national consistent approach to this. So there's often actually a misconception around the words equity and equality, what they mean. Do they mean the same thing? And people think that they can be used interchangeably. As an organisation, we've spent some time thinking and talking about our own use and the broader use in the community of the words. So through our team discussions, we've developed these two definitions to encapsulate our understanding of the two terms and the key differences between the two. So gender equity is the process of being fair and inclusive to all people, regardless of their gender. It recognises the barriers that prevent people from participating fully and equally in life and employs strategies to overcome these. Gender equality is the outcome of gender equity. So it refers to the enjoyment of equal opportunities, worth, resources and well-being by all people regardless of gender. This gives us our framework, and what I want to do now is move on to the Gender Equality Act. Since the CoP last met, the Victorian Parliament has made history by enacting the Gender Equality Act of 2020. So this is the moment where we can all go, hooray, this is awesome. So it is the first of its kind in Australia, and it provides formal recognition of what those of us working in primary prevention have known all along. Gender inequality impacts on health and well-being of girls, women, boys and men, and gender diverse people of all ages. And it's a key driver of violence against women. So the title of the Act lends itself to an aspirational ideal, equality of rights, opportunities, responsibilities and outcomes between people of different genders. We can practically apply the definitions of equity and equality to the Act. So the aspirational outcome of gender equality, that is the enjoyment of equal opportunities, worth, resources and well-being by all people regardless of their gender, is achieved by recognising the barriers faced by women that prevent them from participating fully in the workplace. Examples of this might be lack of female leaders, workplace culture, the gender pay gap and lack of flexible work practices. It's also achieved by applying strategies to overcome these barriers, targets and or quotas related to workplace gender indicators. So for example, regulations may be introduced that require all university leadership teams to have a quota of 50% women by 2024, for example. The Act takes us into the practical realm, and by requiring accountability and transparency and by setting measurable targets and quotas, the Act makes working towards gender equality an achievable goals for those in the public sector. In practical terms, though, what do organisations need to do? So all organisations covered by the Act will have to make measurable measurable steps towards gender equality in the workplace and promote gender equality in all policies, programs and services. So organisations covered by the Act will have to undertake a workplace gender audit, prepare a gender equality action plan, undertake a gender impact assessment on any new or reviewed policies, programs and services that directly impact the public, submit a progress report every 2 years and make the results of the audit and the action plan publicly available. So we've talked about the broader frameworks and now we move to women's health and the strategy for our region. As you may know, the Department of Premier and Cabinet via the Office for Women have recently confirmed the final 2 years of funding for our Prevention of Violence Against Women strategy. So given all the new pressures and stresses that our communities now have to contend with, Women's Health have considered how to go forward with the work. We've been thinking, discussing, consulting with stakeholders across the region around how to best build on our respect and equality for all strategies we move forward. So highlighted throughout all of these discussions has been the work of the members of the community of practice. Their work, the work of this group's vital to the collective impact approach of gender equality. So no good presentation's good without a bit of a flowchart happening. So the key elements of the next phase of our strategy, respect and equality for all, prevention in action. So as you can see, our community practice is still central to the strategy. Within the CoP, members see and take part in the primary prevention work happening across the region, across multiple sectors and also across multiple focus areas. So in this diagram you can see the focus areas that we've highlighted in the Victorian Public Health and Wellbeing Plan that we consider to be most relevant for our region. So these are sexual and reproductive health, climate change, mental health, economic empowerment and prevention of violence against women. So now I'm just checking my notes to make sure I've got the right parts. So I think now I'm going to hand over to Rachel.
Amanda, did you want to introduce the SAGE group?
I do, thank you. See, this is what I went through all my notes beforehand, and I've clearly flipped them around. Sorry, thanks, Casey. So we've got, this is our chart, and as Casey said, we are looking at what we're calling our Regional Strategic Advisors for Gender Equity, or our SAGE group. And the reason we want a sort of a steering group is because we want to make sure that we've got as much reach across the region as possible, and we're making sure that we are informed and inform the collective work of the members of across the community, and we get the best opportunity to guide our work for the next couple of years. So we'll be sending out, after the meeting, we'll be sending out an information sheet asking for expressions of interest for people to be a member of our 8-person SAGE group. So that would be fantastic. We would love to hear from you. So thank you. So Casey, are there any questions in the chat that we want to go through before I hand over to Rachel?
No questions yet.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'm going to hand over to Rachel and get my notes in order. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. So in our Respect and Equality for All strategy, we did acknowledge the number of existing actions and COPs and networks across the region working to address violence against women and advance gender equality. Partners within these networks work in various ways. We're thinking about awareness raising, primary prevention, early intervention and response as well to violence against women. So we do understand the importance of partnerships and collaboration and the connection between those local initiatives to really impact in a collective way, you know, that collective impact stuff. We'd love to know what networks, groups or COPs that you as individuals, but also your organisations are actively participating in at the moment. Which this will actually inform the next phase of our Respect and Equality for All strategy. So you can see the question there on the slide. So we're going to, Casey's going to put up a, it's going to be in our chat. So if you can just note them in the chat boxes. So thinking about yourselves as individuals in your work role, but also your organisation. So if you can always take a couple of minutes to just note down in the chat what networks, what COPs, what groups you might be working with, that would be fantastic. Just take a couple of minutes to do that. Ask me any questions. Wow, there's a lot from you, Lisa. Okay, so I might leave that there and keep moving, but if you do think of anything along the way in the next hour and a half, please add it to the chat, because it'd be really good to collect all of that. There's some amazing work by the looks of it. It's coming in thick and fast now. Okay, so as Amanda mentioned earlier, we've highlighted the main focus areas that we see are most relevant to women in our region. So now we're going to introduce each of these focus areas with consideration to obviously gender equality, also to specific regional challenges, and of course we have to consider the double burden that has been this year 2020 with the summer bushfires and COVID-19. Locally, there is much great work being done across health services, local government, public utilities, and other organisations where each of our focus areas are being addressed in a myriad of ways. As a public health organisation, Women's Health works within the Victorian Public Health and Wellbeing Plan. So continuing together, we as a COP will really be able to dig deeper into how organisations in our region can further influence these areas through that primary prevention lens. Casey will be monitoring the chat, so if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to add them. So our first focus area is climate change, which I'll run through with you. The Hume region, as we know, has been getting warmer and drier as the impacts of climate change make themselves felt, and this trend, as we also know, is expected to worsen. So in fact, for the projections for our region are for higher than average temperatures and longer warm spells, including longer droughts, reduced rainfall throughout the year, yet increasing floods, harsher fire weather and longer fire seasons, and deteriorating ecosystem dynamics, so threatening already vulnerable flora and fauna in our region. So for the region's communities, these projections could mean things like disruptions to roads and transport, energy, tourism and agricultural infrastructure and services, increased stress on health and emergency services, which is what we've already been seeing with COVID-19. Changes in disease occurrence, so things like a longer flu season, and we know that the impacts of post-COVID illnesses are now being discovered and documented for those who have recovered from COVID. So we'll see an impact of that. And also things like an increase in asthma and associated illnesses from that, being exposed to that long-term smoke from the bushfires. I know personally I'm still suffering from that. An increase in heat-related deaths, and that's particularly for our most vulnerable sections of our community. Our other projections include things like crop failure and disruption to our food supply. And a critical one, I guess, for us on our rural properties is reduced water security for towns, industry and agriculture, and increased fuel and energy costs as well. So women are more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change due to existing gender inequalities. Our own gender and disaster research, which was, as many of you know, was the first of its kind in Australia, demonstrates that natural disasters such as bushfire, which is linked to climate change, lead to an increase in violence against women. The research, which was conducted after the Black Saturday firestorm, found that for some women, violence began after the firestorm, and for others, it was pre-existing, so the violence and abuse was happening before the firestorm, but escalated after. So women are also more likely to experience rising energy prices more acutely due to entrenched economic disadvantage, The gender pay gap, high rates of underemployment, lower rates of superannuation, and certainly the high proportion of lone parents in our region are things to consider. We also know that heat waves impact more on women's health than men's, which I did not know. This is because we have a longer life expectancy than men and are more likely to live with things like disabilities and health vulnerabilities. Women are also more likely to play the role of that, emotional shock absorber for the families, leading to their own mental health problems, things like depression and increase in anxiety as well around those holding that emotional toll. Women are more likely than men to live in rented or public accommodation and so have less access to climate-proof housing as well. So these are all things to consider. The links between climate change and gender inequality are likely to be further entrenched by structural inequalities in the way climate change mitigation and adaptation policies are conceived of, formulated and enacted. So in terms of key decision-making roles and the majority of sectors related to climate change, mitigation and those adaptation policies, we actually see a small proportion of women involved in those decision-making roles. Bushfires such as those we experienced in northeast Victoria this year, at the end of last year and this year, and the COVID pandemic are symptoms of climate change. So what these crises have really revealed is that when it comes to gender equity, is how lacking existing response, recovery and adaptation models are when it comes to gender inclusivity, and with decision making, planning and community engagement, data analysis and emergency management all showing a male bias. Our key concern when it comes to climate change is that response, recovery and adaptation models that perpetuate gender inequality may limit the resilience of women, families and our communities, as well as restrict the range of options that are available to individuals, communities and policymakers when it comes to climate change mitigation. I'll leave it there. Is there any questions in the chat there, Casey?
No questions so far. We've got a comment from Lisa, just commenting on the higher rates of underemployment for women due to COVID at the moment.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. So I'll hand over to Amanda to look at our next focus area.
Thank you. So I want to look at economic empowerment, and obviously Rachel's touched on some of these things already, but in May 2020, Women's Health joined with more than 30 organisations and individuals to respond to the federal government's call for comments on their response to COVID-19. So the Snap Forward Feminist Policy Network is a group of individuals and organisations working to ensure gender responsive COVID-19 recovery over the immediate and longer term. So basically they want to snap forward rather than snap back, so that our strategies for recovery contribute to the achievement of gender equality. So the response included 10 recommendations to support our recovery, and while all of them are relevant to the country, the state and our regions, for today I want to focus on the recommendation to support women's diverse economic contribution. So this includes supporting women-led businesses and women in hospitality, arts and culture workforces, looking longer term and focusing on protections for feminised workforces and reviewing the gendered experience of employment conditions and protections, addressing the uneven distribution of unpaid labour, producing an annual gender equity report to capture the contribution of women's unpaid labour to the Australian economy. So out of these recommendations, I just want to focus on one, and I want to look at addressing the uneven distribution of unpaid labour. The Gender Equality Act asks us to look at our data in a gendered way. So on the surface, paid parental leave benefits everyone. But if we consider, if we actually consider the scheme and we review what's available for people and who takes the leave, we can see that even the introduction of the scheme, which ensures both men and women are eligible, it doesn't mean that everyone takes advantage of it or receives an equal benefit from it. So when we look at the data, you can see that while paid parental leave options are available, those who access it are mostly women. In 2013-14, we saw that 99.4% of people accessing the government's scheme were women. And in 2015-16, 91.6% of people in management roles accessing employer-funded schemes were women, and 96.6% of those in non-management roles were women. So this is the latest data we have on this, and we can hope that there's been some shift towards men taking parental leave since then, but even without the data in front of me, I'd hazard a guess that it's not 50-50. So the point of this is that having a scheme or a policy doesn't always mean that people will use it, and that there needs to be cultural acceptance as well. For example, when Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, made a public announcement that her husband was the primary caregiver for their child, women contacted Ardern directly to thank her for the public statement. In many cases, these women's families had made or wanted to make similar decisions, but weren't able to because of the lack of acceptance from their family, their community, or their workplaces. You know, it wasn't accepted that men may want to take time out of their employment to look after their children. Of course, another barrier to men taking time off to care for children is financial. When men do have the option of taking leave, many don't because there's a financial trade-off. A lot of paid leave plans don't fully compensate for lost wages. So when opposite sex couples make the decision about who takes more leave, they may choose the spouse who earns less. And given gender pay gaps, that's often the women. This then leads, of course, to it reduces a woman's income over time, and therefore the value of her superannuation and her ability to retire comfortably. So that's a whole other topic that I'm not going into. But I just want to check, Casey, is there anything in the chat at the moment?
No questions, no.
All right, great, thank you. So I'm going to hand over to Rachel to talk about the next focus area.
So our next focus area is sexual and reproductive health, and I want to do a big shout out to my colleague Bern, who's done some incredible work in this space. So if people see her wanting to talk and she's starting to go like this while I'm talking, let me know. I can see her laughing there. We know that good sexual and reproductive health is important for general health and well-being throughout every person's life. It includes the right to healthy and respectful relationships, accurate information and education. Sexual and reproductive health, or we like to call it SRH, includes timely and affordable access to healthcare, including effective methods of contraception, fertility management and abortion. For Women's Health Goulburn North East to achieve gender equity for girls, women and gender diverse people living in our Goulburn and North East region, SRH is a real priority. Our current sexual and reproductive health plan, which is from 2018 to 21, follows comprehensive population and sexual and reproductive health data collection for all LGAs and mapping of current services and health promotion activities to identify gaps and areas for improvement, and certainly opportunities for that regional collaboration across our area. Improving access to evidence-based information and education and affordable sexual and reproductive health care and services in our region is a key objective for our partnership work and certainly for our advocacy work. So this includes building evidence, knowledge and resources through consultation and research with regional professionals and also, of course, community members. Our work includes advocating for the rights of all Victorian girls, women and gender diverse people to have control and decision-making abilities on matters related to their sexuality, including sexual and reproductive health, free from coercion, discrimination and violence. It's a real key area. You'll all know that many measures for health and wellbeing point to poorer outcomes for women living in rural and regional areas compared to some of those outcomes for those living in metro areas. When compared to Victorian averages and rankings, women living in many LGAs of our Goulburn Northeast region have higher rates of teenage fertility, gynecological, breast and lung cancers. They also experience higher rates of intimate partner, family and sexualised violence, which you all will know, and live in areas with poor rankings for the 5 indicators related to maternal health and well-being. So these 5 areas are maternal health, children's well-being, education status, economic status and socio-economic disadvantage. Victorian research and women's health consultation with regional girls and women highlighted the increased risk factors and barriers that regional women experience due to geographic and social isolation. Not a surprise to you all. Limited access to healthcare and services, increased distance and that sort of fragmented transport options, limited personal finances, a real lack of privacy in rural and regional spaces, and additional costs to actually access those healthcare and services. So, for example, emerging data coming from 1800 My Options has shown that during the pandemic there has been an increase in reproductive coercion, where a woman is forced to either continue or terminate a pregnancy against their wishes by their partner. There has also been an increase in women presenting at later gestation. Murray Stokes has had to limit some of its late-term abortion services due to COVID. Some of you will already know this, meaning that some women have had to continue with pregnancies that they would have otherwise terminated. Locally, the economic impacts of the pandemic on sexual and reproductive health has been evident at Gateway Health. The service has seen multiple women deciding to terminate pregnancies they otherwise would have continued with due to the financial stress. What we are seeing is an amplified version of the disadvantage that's happening in Australia today. In refugee and migrant populations, in international students spaces, and in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander populations, and women living in rural and regional areas. We have a link to an article which we can certainly send out to you or put in the chat as well. But we just wanted to show you the 1800 Options geomap, which really highlights the lack of accessible sexual and reproductive services in our area of Goulburn Northeast. It's about timeliness, it's about affordability, particularly with regard to contraceptive choices, unplanned pregnancy options and support for that, medical and surgical abortion, especially for people, and you can see that there, the shires of Mitchell, Murrindindi and Strathbogie, and those more isolated areas of Moira where access to Shepparton can be really difficult. And you can also see there on your right, Towong has issues as well in terms of options. So has anyone got any comments around that have you added to the chat at all? No? Happy for any comments, as does Alpine Shire, Lisa. Yeah, you can really see there, and it just, that's compounding issues for women regarding sexual and reproductive health and well-being, has massive impact on their well-being. Okay, so for the next focus area, I will hand over to Amanda.
Thanks, Rach. Mental health. Impacts of bushfires and other disasters have a significant impact on our emotional, social and psychological well-being. In the short term, many people impacted by bushfires experienced intense stress reactions. Most of these people recover without intervention and maintain a healthy level of functioning over time in the long term. However, a large proportion of those affected will experience mental health issues in the months or years after the event. The most reported health conditions after disasters are post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, complex grief, and increased suicide risk. Research into the long-term impacts of the Ash Wednesday bushfires found that children of affected families were experiencing mental health impacts of the disaster 20 years on. People most at risk are women, children, and those with greater exposure to the disaster, those with low social support and prior mental health issues. Other contributing factors include post-disaster recovery stressors, such as rebuilding, social and economic disruption. The COVID-19 monitor study found that reported feelings of despair, fear, anger, boredom, loneliness, anxiety and stress increased significantly between March and April 2020, while feelings of optimism and happiness decreased over the same period. Initial research from rapid surveys such as YouGov has highlighted concerns related to anxiety, particularly around work, financial insecurity, fear of infection, food insecurity, and loss of connection with others, both social relationships and support services. The same research found that a number of people reporting mental health issues has increased, and the number of people reporting poor mental health doubled between March and April. Just looking at her notes. A similar survey conducted found that many people were drinking more alcohol to cope with anxiety and stress, and 32% were concerned about their own or a member of their household's drinking. Most at risk, people with pre-existing anxiety and mental health disorders, healthcare workers, most of whom are women, people in quarantine, and the unemployed and casual workforce, the majority of whom are women. So you may have noticed that women are in most of the at-risk areas for mental health impacts post bushfires and COVID-19. Prior to the bushfires, there was an existing gender mental health gap across the state, a gap that was wider for people living in the Hume region. The compounding effects of the recent bushfires and the pandemic are likely to widen this gap even further. Existing data tells us that women who live in the region are more likely to be diagnosed with anxiety and depression than men, have higher reported levels of psychological distress than men, and have higher rates of self-harm. And contributing factors to these gender differences include women's experiences of socioeconomic disadvantage, low income and income inequality, food insecurity, the burden of caring responsibilities, and gender-based expectations about roles, responsibilities and power relations. However, intimate partner violence is the greatest cause of poor mental health and wellbeing across the board. So each of these contributing factors have been amplified in the aftermath of the bushfires and COVID-19. Existing data also tells us that women living in Hume are more likely to seek professional help for mental health problems than men. Young men are less likely to seek help, as many agree that society pressures them to be strong even when they are feeling scared or nervous inside, inhibiting their ability to show vulnerability and engage in help-seeking behaviour. So that's the mental health one. Casey, any comments or questions?
No comments or questions so far.
Thank you. So I will hand over to Rachel to look at our last focus area.
So our final focus area is prevention of violence against women. There was an article in The Age this week It was a really good article, and it was called "The Scandal Behind Locked Doors." And it stated that it is the epidemic no one really understands. This is a society that has been trying to move towards less gender bias and a country with one of the lowest crime rates in the world. And yet police deal with a family violence victim every 6 minutes, and more than 50% of police time is devoted to this plague. And when I read that, I thought, yes, we do understand it. We know that gender inequality is the greatest driver and sets the foundations for violence against women. We do have essential actions to reduce the gender drivers of violence against women at that individual level, the community level, at the organisational level, and again at the society level. The need for systemic change to me is perfectly clear, and I imagine it is to all of you as well. It's certainly made clear through the pandemic effectively isolating women in their own homes. Offenders have upped the ante using coercive control and abuse tactics to wield their power. So we are now seeing the extent of the problem more accurately acknowledged and reported, not only in our communities, but throughout our media, which I think is fantastic. As I said before, we know from our gender and disaster work that family violence increases during and in the aftermath of a disaster. And a global pandemic certainly qualifies as a disaster. According to a study from the Australian Institute of Criminology released this month, which was this year, you may have all seen it. It was called The Prevalence of Domestic Violence Among Women During the COVID-19 Pandemic. If not, we can put that in the chat as well. There appears to be a link between the onset of the COVID pandemic and the onset of physical and sexualized violence and coercive control for many women. So it really matches up with our GADPOD research. 2/3 of women who had experienced physical or sexualized violence by a current or former cohabitating partner since the onset said the violence had started to escalate. Also, although a significant amount of women sought help, there were a large number who were unable to due to safety concerns, and this was echoed by support agencies who found it really challenging to reach out to women as well. The gender and disaster research and continuing work has built knowledge and awareness about masculinities and gendered approaches to support planning and response to disasters. Financial hardship and loss of employment are also linked to family violence, both of which are more likely after a major fire or during severe economic meltdown. So this is a quote from a recent article. Again, we'll give you these links to these articles from Jodie, who we've worked closely with out of Kinglake since we started this research. She said, there was a lot of concern about men not expressing how they were feeling and how they were dealing with the recovery, she said. It became, I'm going to say, normal to hear about domestic violence in the months after 2009 blaze. You know what I mean? It was just normal. Our challenge is to deeply question and challenge the normalisation of violence against women. That's our big challenge, isn't it, everyone? So that brings us to a close of the focus groups. Are there any questions or comments on those focus groups? We will certainly, the articles that we've mentioned, we will put in the chat, or we can absolutely send out to, Casey's probably already done it, she's quick. Any comments or questions at this point? Thank you for putting them in the chat there. So basically it all looks a bit gloomy, doesn't it? When we were doing a rehearsal of this, I think we got to the mental health section and we all went a bit sad. So we just want to acknowledge that, yes, the information may have left you feeling overwhelmed, because I say this in the training I deliver all the time, and many of you will know we've got our professional hats, but we've also got hearts here, so it can affect us. So we've discussed some really big issues, but it's important to highlight where the inequality exists and acknowledge that it exists in our culture and in our systems. So tackling the issue from a systemic standpoint, we know is really hard, but nowhere near impossible. And each time we make a challenge in a system, that we know that there's ripple effects happening as well. This is why when we work together, we can make a difference. It just takes a while to make systemic and cultural change. There is some incredible work happening in all the focus areas, and it's not all doom and gloom. But today we're really just wanting to set that scene, giving a broad overview of the gendered impacts impacting our communities all across Goulburn and the Northeast region. Lastly, this COP brings together people from a wide range of sectors for collective impact, like I talked about before. We're looking forward to working together to bring transformational change to the people of our region at those levels: individual, community, organisation, and we're going to have a big impact on society as well. That's our big aim. So we'd like to, just going to minimise the chat. We'd like it to take a moment to hear from you all, so you can take a breather from listening to us. We're going to launch a poll which asks you to let us know what your regional focus areas are for you. So again, thinking about your own role, but also thinking about your organisation. I'm going to ask Casey to launch the poll in a sec, and we'll review the results afterwards. But just to note that in the poll, you've got multiple choice answers, so you can tick as many as you like. So we'll launch the poll. Take your time and think about your hat as an individual in your workplace, and also your organisation, so you can answer it from those two perspectives. Thank you, everyone. Can everyone see the poll? Just a thumbs up. Thanks, Debbie. Thanks, Lucy. Alan, can you see the poll? Cool.
The other thing people might want to be aware of is you do need to answer every question, because if you get to the bottom and you haven't answered a question, it won't let you submit.
Okay. Is there anyone that's still completing? Just put your hand up. Nope, okay. So for the first one, we've got a high percentage for both PVOR, Prevention of Violence Against Women, and Gender Equity. None of the focus areas, so everybody's working in at least one of those focus areas, which is amazing. And then we've got responding, so we've got some response agencies there as well. That's great, thank you. And climate change, that's terrific. So of the following focus areas, which would add value to your practice? What have we got there? Let's have a look. So mental health, okay, terrific. Gender equity and equality. And I think that there is prevention of violence against women. We've got high with climate change as well. So there's high percentages there, and in economic empowerment as well. That's terrific. Thank you, everyone. Really good to know. Mental health is a big issue at the moment, that's for sure. Certainly for our region. So we talked about in that last question about your organisation. So your interests, what would you be interested in? We've got access and inclusion as a front runner there. So that's really going to inform where we head with the COP. So we've got access and inclusion, outstanding, and then intersectionality as well. Got high percentage there with the LGBTIQA and plus and inclusion and healthy masculinities. So it looks like across the board there's a lot of interest there, particularly around access and inclusion, intersectionality, healthy masculinities, and LGBTIQA. So this really will inform our work. Thank you. And then you can see there which of the local government areas. Moira, we've got 55% there. Strathbogie, very interesting as to where you're all working and where you're all from. Amanda, have you got any comments or questions about the results of the poll you'd like to add, or Bern or Casey?
No, thanks, Rach. I think it's great. It's one thing that's really good to see is that we've got people from every local government area represented here. So it's about physical, about our region, so that we can make sure that we're hearing what's needed and what's being done in all right across the region. I think that's really good.
Yep.
And yeah, so that was all I wanted to say.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for that. So I'll leave you with Amanda.
Who's just reiterate what I just said, really. This is, as Rach said, you know, we're wanting to get a sense of where we are right now, take a bit of a census, and then say, where do we want to go? Where do we want to go in the future? So we'll be reviewing this information with the information you gave us in the chat earlier about what networks and groups are around at the moment, and we'll be taking all of that plus our next bit that we're going to be doing another exercise in a minute. We'll be getting that, and we'll be combining all of that, and then decide, you know, thinking about how we can go forward as a community of practice, but not only looking at what's there but what's not there. You know, what's missing, what areas are important, and what do we need to be focusing on that we don't have either people physically there or focus areas. So that leads us to our last formal piece of the community of practice, and I'm going to hand over to Casey for this.
Okay, I'm just going to talk about our Reflections from a Distance project. So this is a story gathering project that we launched at the end of April. And the purpose of this project is to listen, document, learn from, and amplify the voices of people across our region. about their experiences living through the pandemic. So far, the wide range of stories, observations and accounts that we've received from people in our communities have further highlighted the gender impacts of the focus areas that we've talked about today. So these stories, we're going to use them to inform our advocacy, both during and after the pandemic. Also, we're going to use them to inform our strategic planning. We will use them in our social media, de-identified of course, and other resources. So we're particularly interested in what we're calling the pressure points of the pandemic. So how the pandemic has impacted on personal lives, support networks, family and social relationships, parenting, access to services, resources and facilities, health and wellbeing, and economic and working life. So now it's your turn. We'd like to invite everyone here to take the next 15 minutes or so just to record your own experience of the pandemic, but as a practitioner. So we're interested in hearing how COVID has impacted on the individuals or the communities that you work with in your professional role. So we've noticed that as a team, we often find ourselves talking about the different ways the pandemic has impacted on the women in our community. So for example, for us, the new barriers that women are facing accessing technology and services, we've really noticed that. So we'd love to hear how your own observations of the impacts, how they've impacted on the people that you're working with. So this can be from the last couple of weeks or months, and ideally with consideration to these focus areas that we've touched on today. So I think Amanda's going to pop the link to the Reflections project in the chat. So if everyone could just open that on their computer, feel free to turn your webcam off and make sure you're muted. And we'll play some music in the background for the next 15 minutes. And then we'll let you know when the time is up and we'll get everyone to come back. So does everyone understand what they're doing? If you've got any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or pop it in the chat. And I'll get some music organised.
Great, thanks everybody. People are comfortable, they can maybe just put their video back on, so we know you're back in the room. And as Casey said, please leave that open and finish it off after the meeting and submit if you haven't already finished. And also you can do this as many times as you want to. So if you finish this and then you come back, you think in a couple of days, oh, I could have written about that, go back, please. And the more information we have, the better. And having your observations as people working in this space is really, really useful for us. As Casey said, for all of those reasons, to look at advocacy, strategic planning for our organisation in general, but also looking at our community of practice and in informing that going forward. So thank you very much. I guess we're on the finishing stretch now, and maybe before I wrap up, I'm interested to know if there's anybody has anything that they would like to comment on in the chat, or ask a question. Take yourself off mute and ask. It's a little bit difficult to see everybody right now, but if there is anyone that wants to make a comment, would like to say anything, we can have that now. So what I might do is I might do our wrap up. If you do want to speak, please use your virtual hand, pop it up, or pop it into the group chat. So I just want to do a brief recap of what we've done this afternoon. So basically what we've covered is that the community of practice works within a framework, national, state, region-wide, and that all of them ask us to consider gender when thinking about primary prevention. So the focus areas that we've looked at today fall within the Victorian Public Health and Wellbeing Plan, and we're now overlaying the legislative requirements of the Gender Equality Act. Again, I just want to reiterate that everyone's welcome as part of the community of practice on an ongoing basis. But if you think it may not be for you, get in contact and we'll talk about how we can work with you or your organisation in other ways. I guess the other thing too is that the way that we're working today, you know, this is new for us doing this sort of space, and one of the things that are valued in a community of practice is that opportunity to talk with each other, and so that's definitely something in future communities of practice that we want to do. We've got the opportunity, if we are still constrained by working online, then we have breakout rooms. There are other ways of doing this. So that's definitely on the cards. We're not planning on having us talking at you for a large amount of the community of practice. We really want to encourage and support people to build their own networks and to work with each other on a one-to-one basis or in small groups, which is probably going to be the easiest way to do that in this space. As we've said a few times, the information that we've gathered today will be collated, analysed, and to support the future work of the community of practice, and to inform our Respect and Equality for All Prevention in Action strategy. And of course, all our findings will be shared. So we'll also be asking for expressions of interest from people who would like to work with us to guide and inform the community of practice over the next 2 years. So we'll be sending out a couple of pages on how to express interest, but also what's involved and what the group is. So we'll also be sending out the slides from the presentation, a recording of the presentation, and if there's anything in the chat that wasn't addressed, we will get to that as well. We'll send that out too. We'd also really appreciate your feedback on today's session. As part of the feedback, we'll also be asking you to give us your thoughts on the format, the frequency, of the community of practice. So please do take a few minutes. I'm going to post it in the chat in a second. And yeah, so please do take the time to fill that out. That would be much appreciated. And I finally just want to say thank you. Look, it's just taking the time to appreciate is really taking the time to participate is fantastic. I know how busy so many of you are, and I also want to say thank you for the work that you're doing across the region in our community. That is of great value to all of us. Thank you. So I'm going to post the evaluation link now. And the other thing, the next slide is for those of you that aren't sure how to contact us. It has our contact details on it. The other thing that will be going out is we've made reference to a lot of data and studies, etc. We'll be sending out the links to all of that evidence to back up the information that we've provided today, as well as the links to the again, we'll send out the links, etc. if you didn't collect them from the chat today. So that is it from me. Casey, did you want to say anything in wrapping up?
No, I think you said everything there, Amanda. Just thanks again for participating, everyone. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rach.
Oh, thank you, everyone. It's good to get together, and I know, like I said, the information can be tough, but you know, we need to really work together to make this cultural change that we want and see the world that we want, and we can do it in Goulburn and in the northeast area, I think. And we do hope that you liked the jazzy music that we provided as well. Thanks, Casey, for the music.
All right. Look, we might just stay on for a few minutes, and if anybody wants to chat, that would be great. And otherwise, thanks again, and we will see you at the next community of practice. Look after yourselves. Stay safe, everyone.